Hello everybody and welcome back to the farm. As I alluded to in a last video, now that I have the big tractor and now that the field is plowed, the next bucket list item for 2023 is to do some brush hogging. Now I bought this brush hog at an auction in Madison, New York for $200 in April of 2023. Fast forward to October of 2023 as you're seeing the video in front of you, and I've basically spray painted or respray painted the brush hog orange. It was orange to begin with, I just gave it a freshen up. But the problem was I couldn't expand the PTO shaft. It was just frozen. So what I ended up doing was hooking one end of it up to a tow strap, and I hooked it up to the big tractor, and I pulled and pulled and pulled, and although I dragged the brush hog a little bit, the two halves of the PTO shaft did eventually split. Getting them back together was a messy job and a bit of a headache, but it's now back together and it expands and contracts as appropriate. There was a little bit of maintenance that had to be done on this brush hog, but the biggest fear in buying a used brush hog is that you never know if they're going to work okay. You don't know what condition they're in. You don't know if the gearbox is seized. You don't know if any of the drive shafts or the spindles are bent or twisted. And they say that one of the only ways to know if you have a good brush hog is to hook it up to a tractor and start the PTO. And if it shakes violently, then you know that things are bad. But I knew that I had to do some maintenance on this, so the first thing I did was I wanted to look at the blades and address those. So I hooked up a strap to my little tractor and to one end of the brush hog, and I lifted it up past its tipping point so that it tipped back maybe 2 feet onto the bucket of my tractor. Then what I did is I took a second strap and I strapped all the way around the brush hog to the base of my tractor. So I have it strapped at the top and I have it strapped in the middle, and it's leaning backwards into the tractor, which you can't really see here. These things are ultra heavy, so safety first whenever dealing with a brush hog. Make sure it is well secured, well braced, and make sure it cannot fall on you. So that was job number one. Job number two was to look at the blades, and I knew that I would need some power if I had to sharpen them. So I went to another property that I own here in my city, kind of a storage garage, and I've had a generator that's been sitting here that I bought at Harbor Freight many years ago, and I keep it here for an emergency, but I figured this was the perfect tool to finally bring up to the farm, as I have electricity at this garage and I don't at the farm. So onto the truck it goes, and now we're going to be able to address any sort of maintenance issues requiring power tools at the farm. So once I got the generator over to the farm, about a 10-minute drive, I fired it up and I plugged in a grinder. Now there's two schools of thought with brush hog blades. Either some people like to leave them dull and blunt, and some people like to sharpen them. In my case, I wanted to sharpen them because I don't have a gigantic finish mower and I don't know what I'm going to be using this brush hog for. So I want to make sure that it can tackle everything, including semi-finish mowing. I want it to be able to cut grass in addition to, saplings and brush and various other junk. So I took about 20 minutes, and on both blades I ground both sides of the blade down to a razor sharp point. Now these blades aren't in great condition, but they're in good enough condition that I could put a really sharp edge onto them. Once that task was done, it was just a matter of reversing everything that I had done to secure the brush hog and to lower it back down to the ground. This is also a very dangerous process that you don't want to do manually. You definitely want to make sure you have some piece of equipment doing it, and if you do this, you want to make sure that nobody is around where this thing could fall on them or that they could be injured by it. There are swinging blades at this particular step. So once I had some of the maintenance done, I wanted to hook it up to the big tractor, and just like with the plow that I bought, this ended up being easier said than done. This thing is probably 3 times heavier than the plow, and I could not get this lined up, and I certainly couldn't drag this around or manhandle it. I tried lifting the arms of the 3-point hitch, I tried using a hammer. In the end, I had to, for a second time, hook up the brush hog to my tractor to pull it just about an inch. It was just out of alignment a little bit, but this is just too heavy to move manually. So that was it, that one little tiny adjustment, and the 2 arms went on as well as the top link. Getting the PTO shaft on though, oh, this was a 2-hour process. No matter what I did to the PTO shaft, I just couldn't get it aligned to the splines on the PTO shaft of the tractor. This was a frustrating process. So I paused and I filled up the gearbox. The gearbox was completely empty. So with some hydraulic oil, I topped it up all the way to the top. I also took some hydraulic gasket caulk, putty, goo, whatever, and I made a gasket to go all the way around where the top panel attaches to the gearbox. The last step was to attach the safety shroud, and I did eventually get the PTO shaft on by twisting the spline shaft on the tractor just about a 1/4 inch and everything lined up. And then it was time to actually test this, and I held my breath and I was waiting for this thing to shake violently out of control. Why else would they sell it so cheaply? As I turned on the PTO shaft, to my amazement, it worked perfectly. We're in business. I have a working brush hog. I was so excited, and without wasting any time, I wanted to tackle the very first job that I've been waiting for a brush hog for all summer, and that is to mow down the tractor path leading to the pond on the side of my property. This tractor path is overgrown with probably waist-high weeds. I know where the path is, and I have to bushwhack my way down the path every time I go. But with just 2 passes of this brand new brush hog, everything's mowed down. Now it's kind of deceiving looking at this video because it looks like the trail is already mowed, but what you can't see is what I'm looking at in front of the tractor, which is those waist-high weeds. This thing mowed it down perfectly. It cut down some saplings, it cut down some shrubs. It also took care of some sticks and twigs and branches that were on the ground. Upon finishing that task, I immediately went to the other side of my property, and I wanted to mow down the side access road to the back cleared acreage of my property. This was a perfectly manicured road last year when I finished up the season with the bulldozer, but just like everything else, it has overgrown with the same waist-high weeds. But this brush hog took care of all of those. It brought it all the way back down to just about dirt, and it made very quick work of all of the overgrowth in this area and in every area. As you can see, it works very well, and it's rapid. And the other nice thing is because it has sharpened blades, it worked perfectly well on small grass, low-lying grass, as it did with waist-high weeds and saplings. But this moment right here is where trouble started. I backed the tractor and the brush hog down the farm road, and if you recall, it's a muddy mess. And unfortunately, I got all the way back to the drainage ditch, which marks the halfway point, and I buried the tractor in probably 10 inches to a foot of wet, soft mud. Further, the brush hog became a plow for mud. So the brush hog is stuck, independent of the tractor being stuck. If I had thought to remove the brush hog immediately upon this getting stuck, I probably could have gotten the tractor out, but it was such a pain to put the brush hog on, I wanted to try and get it out as one unit. So I took my truck and I very carefully backed the truck all the way to the tractor. Fortunately, my cousin Jim happened to be out mowing his lawn and he saw me struggling, so he came to give me a hand. So I attached 2 tow straps to the tractor, to the undercarriage of my truck, and I thought I would be able to get it out, but it didn't work. So Jim and I spent the next 20 minutes shoveling mud out of every crevice under this tractor, under the wheels, from around the wheels, from under the brush hog, around the sides of the brush hog, and we tried and we tried and we simply couldn't get it freed. We tried until 10 p.m. that night, 4.5 hours. In the end, I brought my little tractor out, which aided in getting the brush hog off. I nearly got the little tractor stuck as well, but fortunately I didn't. So once I separated the brush hog from the tractor, my cousin Jim and my neighbor Ron and I were able to use my truck to pull the tractor free. The next day, I came to the farm. I very carefully drove the tractor back close to the area where it got stuck, and I attached a tow strap to the brush hog that was sitting there all night, and I was able to safely get the tractor out as well as the brush hog. Once both were free, I immediately reattached the brush hog to the tractor. I didn't want to lose any time in completing the brush hogging. The season was rapidly coming to a close. This is maybe mid-October at this point, and I probably had a week to try and get everything else done. So the next day I came back out and I used the brush hog to mow the road frontage area in front of my field. Now this isn't right against the road. The road is on the other side of the trees on the left-hand side of the screen, but this is that frontage area in between the trees and the field right by the road. Now this created a terrible dust cloud, and if you didn't think every particle of that dust was inside that cab, you would be wrong. It was a dusty, dirty mess. But I got it mowed, and then I went down the entire side of the field, more waist-high grass, all the way up to the very edge of my property. And working into the night, I got it all cut down. The next day I came back. This is the 3rd or 4th day in a row, and I made several passes right up against the buildings to try and clear some of the brush in that area. It worked just fine. And then once I couldn't get any closer to the buildings, I used the bucket and I scraped backwards, and I was able to remove a lot of those very tall weeds and saplings and whatnot that was growing right against the building. And that brings us to where we are today. This is New Year's Day, January 1st, 2024, and I came to the farm just to take a few shots. I know I've shown these shots before, but now with the context of all of this having been brush hogged, I just wanted to point out that all of this area, those waist-high weeds, it's all gone. If I make the right-hand turn around the corner of the planting field, same thing. It's all bare ground. And all of this is going to be converted to grass come spring, with the exception of the planting field. This is the side access road. I have a very long continuous shot of this video to show you that on either side of the access road there's still very high weeds, although they're dead because it's winter, but the access road is completely clear. You can also see the source of a lot of the muddiness of this access road. This is just standing water that needs to be drained through a channel that I have to dig with the backhoe across this area of the access road. As we move down toward the drainage ditch in the center of the access road, you could see remnants of the struggle that occurred. Tire tracks and skid marks and all sorts of stuff trying to get the tractor out. This is even more pronounced down toward the drainage ditch, where you can see all of this chaos, and this was as a result of the tractor getting stuck. This will have to be fixed. But there's a lot of standing water that needs to be drained into the irrigation channel here, and that whole second half will need to be cleared once I could get something over there to clear it, hopefully something more than the weed whacker. Moving across to the other side of the property, this is the tractor path. And similarly, you can see that on either side of the tractor path, there's very tall weeds. Those weeds carried right across the tractor path, but having brush hogged all of this area, it's all completely clear, and it has stayed clear. And of course, here's the tractor covered for winter with the brush hog still attached. As spring rolls around, I'm going to take another pass over all of the areas just to make sure everything is level and even for the spring growing season, and the plow will need to be reattached so I can plow the field. Things are happening, and there's a lot more to come. More projects to cover, more old video to show you, and then of course we need to move into the winter projects. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.